Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
Beach FM 106.3, my very great pleasure now to welcome the KCDC Waste Minimization Advisor, Eilish Andrews. Eilish, good morning and welcome.
Morena, John.
Lovely to talk to you. You advise on waste minimisation. I desperately need advice. I find it's a wonderful idea in theory. In practice, it just seems to be quite difficult, particularly with the plastics. And I've got no idea what's a 1 and what's a 7 and what's a 58. It really is confusing. And I suspect that is a common issue that people have. What exactly do you do in terms of your advice in waste minimisation?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a concern a lot of people have, actually, with plastics. It's quite a confusing one. That is something that we do spend a lot of time on in our communications with schools. I go into schools quite a bit, and we deliver a zero waste education program, and we do deliver a whole lot of units there, but one of them really does focus on that recycling and plastics and just getting the kids to get to know their plastics so they can understand what can be recycled and the reasons why some can and can't be recycled. That's one element to it, but there's a whole other side of it as well, all about encouraging reuse, composting, making sure that we're keeping our food scraps out of the landfill and making sure they're going into the garden to make nutritious food. There's lots of elements to what we do to minimise waste and the advice we give.
The kids seem to get it. That's my observation anyway. I mean, they're really switched on. It's the old codgers really like me that I worry about. We'll have to go along to the class that you run in the schools, perhaps. Do you have any way of educating the older people who really are the ones who should be taking more notice of this?
Yes, so it's slightly easier, like you say, to just go into a school and there's a whole lot of kids there waiting to learn. It's a little bit more difficult when everyone's got jobs and is busy. It is a thing that a lot of people struggle with to find time for, but I think once you get it, you can't unget it. So it's just managing to get that message out there in the newspapers, speak to people at the transfer stations, put out flyers, It's just a bit of a challenge to reach.
Well, perhaps we should talk more regularly on the radio in that case and spread the good word, because it certainly is a good word. And we had last week, I think it was, Janet Holbrook briefing us on what's happening in that wonderful community of Paikakariki, where they really do seem to get waste minimisation. And she was telling us about this wonderful initiative they've got with a bike and a trailer and running around the place and picking up the food waste. I imagine that's the sort of thing that you would encourage.
Absolutely. So that's actually the Paikakariki Community Orchard and Garden. They're running that, and they were a recipient of one of the waste minimisation grants that we supply. That was last year's round of funding, and they secured some funding to get that e-bike set up so that they can go around their community and collect food scraps from people who may not have time to compost or don't want to, or don't know how, and they take that back to their amazing community garden and they compost it on site there to turn it into food for their trees and their food that they grow there. So that's an awesome example of what communities are doing at the moment, and people are really stepping up. There's a big shift at the moment. I really feel that.
Yes, indeed. That's a great example of what can happen. Now, you mentioned the grants. Is this the waste reduction grant?
Yes, yeah. So once a year we open up the grants. They're called the waste reduction grants. There are a couple of categories, so they can apply to a number of different organisations. We've got a category that's called the community projects, which are more to support community participation and education around waste reduction. So we get a lot of schools applying to that for on-site composting, for help with signage or recycling bin infrastructure. We've had some schools applying to get engaged with their school community by facilitating beeswax making wraps or things like that for the school community to rally around that. Lots and lots of community projects and school groups apply to that one. We've got this other category called seed funding. That's what the Paikakariki Community Orchard Group applied to. So that's about establishing waste businesses and initiatives. And we've actually this round, because we're still actually open for this year's round, we have made a new category for business waste reduction, which is about supporting those existing businesses to implement measurable waste minimisation from the business's operation. So, I mean, that could be getting on-site composting for a cafe or recycling, or, it could be a really it could be a innovative way to reuse within the operation of your business.
I think this is excellent. Now, where does that money come from? Does that come from the government levy on goods that are dumped?
Exactly. So that doesn't come from rates. It comes from the waste levy. So for every tonne of rubbish that is put into landfill, currently it's $10 extra. It's called a levy, and that is collected by the Ministry for the Environment. And then some of that's used for infrastructure at a national level, and then some of that fund is also distributed to councils around the country, and that's what we use for a lot of and it has to be used for waste minimisation.
Right.
So there's certain criteria. We can't spend it on other things. It has to have be waste minimisation, so whether that's education and a lot of that goes into this waste reduction grant that we facilitate.
And as I understand, that levy's going up. The idea is to nudge us into minimising the waste. In other words, the less waste that goes to the fill, the less we have to pay. And that is a very sensible way of going about it. But speaking of sensible, don't you think that we should stop at its source? Don't you think that we should avoid buying things that we can't recycle, that we can't minimise the waste from? Is there a way of being able to avoid the products that are not recyclable?
Oh, you know what? You absolutely can, but I do acknowledge that it is a bit harder sometimes. So there is actually an interesting piece of work going on, run by the Ministry for the Environment, looking at banning some particular hard-to-recycle plastics. So that will be really interesting to see what happens with that. So that might make it easier to be buying things that can be recycled. But you just got to take a look, really. Just got to take a look when you're at the supermarket, have a look at the bottom of a container, have a look at, is it a 1, 2, or a 5?
You see, this is where we started. This is where I get confusing. Why can't they just have traffic lights, green for recycle, red for not? Or a plus or a minus sign?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a lack of labelling. So there are some really interesting labelling systems out there that definitely the Ministry for the Environment would be looking at evaluating them, whether we can implement them. I think at the moment as a country, because unfortunately we are quite far behind other developed countries with our infrastructure for dealing with waste and minimising waste. So I think getting the infrastructure up to par will enable us to then look at making sure that we're labelling things more clearly. But if we go straight to labelling things clearly with very poor infrastructure, you're going to have a great label, but you're not going to be able to do much with that product, Yeah.
This, obviously, it's a very, very complex and almost like a circular process that we're going through here. It starts with us, with what we buy, but there's all these integrated linking loops that have to be all lined up. We have to get our ducks in a row to make sure this works properly. So it's a matter of getting our way there step by step, I imagine. Hey, Eilish, we're going to have to talk again. This is really interesting, and thank you very much for the work that you do. But also, I think that it's something that it's in all of our interests, both individually, as a community, as a nation, to try and get this right, because obviously we're sort of struggling a bit at the moment, and every bit of progress will help us all. So can we do it again sometime, Eilish?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Would love to.
Excellent. Eilish Andrews is Waste Minimization Advisor with the KCDC. And Eilish, it's been great to have you on the radio today. Thank you so much for your company.
Thanks for having me, John.
106.3 Beach FM.